So, can you just explain to anybody that would be thinking about booking you or delivering a session, you delivering a session for them on reading people, what is it? How would you describe it?
The idea behind reading people is that as human beings we are each in a physical vehicle, which is the body. And the more we can understand the vehicle that we're in and the vehicle that the other person is in, the better our relationships are. We can understand our own strengths and weaknesses, the strengths and weaknesses of the other person, and also how someone is going to respond to imagery and words. There are certain words and imagery that appeal to certain types, and there is words and imagery that will repel certain types. As an example, the word exciting, if I say that to one type, they are literally excited by the idea. If you say that to a different type, it's sort of like, feels a little bit uncomfortable to me. And that second type, I would use a word like thought through and considered, and they would feel safer and the communication would be much easier. So it's a way of understanding at a deep level how I'm wired, how the other person is wired, and how best to communicate with them.
How much can you get across in a 60-minute session or an effective keynote session, 45 minutes or 60 minutes? How much of this material can you get across to an audience?
What is powerful about this system is its simplicity. And so a lot of it can be communicated in a fairly short period of time, say 30 minutes, 60 minutes. You can cover the basics of the system, and during that time there will be a lot of people in the audience who will be making connections, understanding themselves, seeing themselves differently. And I also use people in the audience as examples. If they volunteer and it sounds like I'm describing their type, then I'll ask them to stand up, wave to the crowd. And what this does is it really quickly embeds the information. And in many ways, this is something that we are recognising rather than learning. It's as if there's something we've seen all along that we've never really had put into a structure or put into certain words that make it really easy to quickly recognise someone.
What do the audience generally think, feel and do during and after your sessions?
During the sessions, I often see audience members scribbling a lot of notes. I see a lot of people looking at the person next to them out of the corner of their eye, or perhaps even nudging someone and pointing at someone else as they begin to recognise types. There are moments of reflection where someone's sitting there thinking, that sounds a lot like me or my significant other. And after the session, I have had a lot of feedback around people who have gone through their team and figured out their types and have started to approach them differently and engage with them differently. And this leads to more effective communications. And I've also had a lot of clients who have applied this to their clients so that they can find ways to just avoid conflict and to build rapport and to respect that each of us sees the world in a different way, and if I understand how someone else sees the world, I can then adjust the way I communicate with them. So there's a lot of ripples that go out, sometimes for many years.
How immediately can the audience transfer what they've learned in a session delivered by you back into business? How immediate is it? Have you got any examples?
I have had people approach me 6 months or a year after a session, and they've said after leaving the session they've realised one of their direct reports was a specific type, and that trying to encourage that person to take the limelight more, supporting them and being more driven and wanting them to be more visible was exactly what that person didn't want. And they basically dialed back on the pressure they were putting on that person. That person's a lunar type in this system, and the relationship is now flourishing. Their direct report feels much more comfortable, more respected, and is actually making more of a contribution to the company because they feel safer and supported rather than being pushed into something that is innately uncomfortable for them.
How impactful is the knowledge for the audience when using these skills, this knowledge that you impart, in things like negotiation or working with customers?
One of the applications is having people decide who will engage with who. So if you have an irate customer, or a flashpoint in your business where you have customers that tend to be calling because they're frustrated about something, there are certain types that are just innately, naturally adept at dealing with that, at calming that person down and then solving the problem. There are other types that doesn't happen so easily. So to actually decide what's the right seat on the bus for someone, who is the ideal person to play a certain role within an organisation, that has had some quite remarkable effects. I've also been told some horror stories. I've had people come up after a session and realise that an approach they had taken in a boardroom situation was completely destructive, because they were treating the other person how they would wish to be treated rather than the way that that person would respond to more positively.
For a leader of a business or an owner of a business, how many times have you had people uncovering things they didn't know about their team or behaviours that they weren't able to interpret, and this obvious skill set now, this knowledge set, allows them to do better?
I worked with the sales director of a large organisation. He had me come in and work with each of his teams throughout the UK, and part of that process was him coming to the slow but inescapable recognition of the impact that his style was having on his people. So he's what's called a Saturnine type, which has a very sort of paternal and sometimes a very strict way of approaching things. And he realised he was giving off the message, I know more than you do, I know better than you how things should be. And it took him a while to take a more reflective approach and to invite input from people before then just sort of ordering them what to do. And it was difficult for him, because it can be difficult for us to rein in our default position, but he found tremendous value, and he's got much more solid and respectful relationships with his regional directors now.
So what would you say to somebody thinking about booking you for the first time and they can't quite make their mind up? In one line, what's in it for them?
The value of this information is that it enables someone to very quickly determine the type that they're dealing with. They can decode the hardware of that person, and the relationships that they can create and that they can build and that they can bring into play are far more effective than if they did not have this information. There's also a lot of humour in the presentation and in the material itself, and being able to not take ourselves too seriously and not take stressful situations too seriously is of tremendous value. So a light touch approach that goes very deep in creating more effective and more fruitful relationships.
Cool.